it cost less than $10 to make one vaccine. But how much were they actually selling the vaccine for? Like, the government and insurance companies were being charged $120, upward $150 for a COVID vaccine. So now we're sitting back and we're like, wait a minute. It costs $10 for you to make it. That's a crazy profit margin.
You are now part of a social experiment.
See now where my limit is. Only got no ohs.
Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us today on the journey towards self-mastery. Our next guest has a bachelor's degree in Integrated Neuroscience from Binghamton University and a master's degree in Interdisciplinary Health Sciences from Drexel University College of Medicine. She's also made significant contributions to the study of frontotemporal lobar degeneration, FTLD, and the use of optical coherence tomography, OCT, to distinguish subtypes of FTLD, which has been published. When she's not doing amazing things in science, she's working on her company, Whiplash, an eyelash company based in New York that is designed to promote the easy use of accessories like eyelashes. Let's welcome today Miss Jennifer Leveque to the program. Jennifer, how are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. Definitely a pleasure having you on the program.
That was a mouthful, and you did good.
Yeah, we gotta kind of. I want to explain that before. That's a tongue twister.
Degeneration.
Yeah, that's a
mouthful.
That's a tongue twister,
it is.
man. Like, so if we were like 9 years old, like, how would you explain frontotemporal lobar degeneration? I know it has to do.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. FTLD honestly is sort of like a subclass. I'm gonna, we all know about Alzheimer's, and like as we age, sometimes our cognition, like our mental capacity, declines. So FTLD is just like a long way of describing what's going on in your brain as you get older, like the degeneration of that.
So what did the research that you did, like, what did that kind of say about that? I'm interested in that.
Ooh, yeah, oh gosh. So you want me to
like,
nerd out?
If
like
we, no,
okay.
You got to talk to us. This is going to be like FTLD for dummies. Like, you got to give us a class,
Okay. So I could simplify it. So basically, like with any research project, you are asking a question and you want to answer the question, right? So the research that I was doing at the University of Pennsylvania, it was like a diagnostic. So like what can we use to figure out if somebody has FTLD? Like, how do we diagnose a person who has FTLD? So the research that I did with the doctor that I was working with, his hypothesis, his idea was that, like, can we look at the eyeball? Can we figure out parts of the eyeball that will show us what type of brain activity is happening, right? Because the eyes are very connected to the brain. And so through that research, so that was our question. Can we look at the eyes to figure out what's happening in the brain? So what me and my doctor and our team was doing was we were using those OCTs, so the optical coherence tomography. Those are just like pictures of the back of your eye. It shows you like nerve endings and like what's going on back there. So we would look at pictures and try to understand if there were any patterns. And there were a lot of patterns. So we ended up finding out that you could use images for your eyes to figure out if you have a chance of getting FTLD, if you have a chance of that type of mental decline. I think that's the simplest
I got
way
it.
that
I got it. If I got it, I think our listeners will be able to get it. That is fascinating, man. Like,
okay.
Yeah,
it was pretty cool.
That is dope. So before we get into your other work and everything, I just want to get into this whole process. Like, how were you born like a genius, or like, how did this whole thing come about? Like, what was What was this whole thing like
No.
developing?
I mean, I don't want to say no, I wasn't born in like maybe no. Honestly, I have to give credit where it's due, right? Like, I think I came from a really, like, I had a really great upbringing. Like, I have to credit my parents for instilling a lot of positive things in me, like, prioritizing school. That was like, I'm Haitian, so there was no way that I wasn't gonna do well in school. So I have to give my parents that credit. I have to give my parents credit for instilling confidence in me. I know that I am the confident person that I am today because I watched my parents show up confidently for themselves, but they also made sure that, like, I was celebrated, or, I was feeling supported in anything that I wanted to do. So first and foremost, my parents. Then I have to say, like, I think I also had like quality education. I know that not everyone is afforded the same access to education, but I know that I grew up in an area where, our school was like awarded years after years for being the best school district, right? So I recognize that, my educational journey started, I got a really great start. And so I think, like, I have to give my parents credit, but I also have to give my environment, like where I was, also contributed to that greatly.
And the school that you grew up with, it was in Long Island. It was a predominantly white school as well.
Yes, it
did
was.
that have did that play any role in your education or your experiences?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to describe my experience, like, first of all, most of my experiences academically and professionally, like, consistently throughout life, have been in predominantly white spaces, especially as someone, like, in the sciences. Like, so I'm African American, but I'm also a woman. So like oftentimes there isn't a lot of diversity. Like, we're trying, but it's not always there. I know for a fact that growing up in a predominantly white area, where I went to a predominantly white school, it was sort of like a double-edged sword, right? Like, first I'll say the negative. What I realized is that I didn't really get to see examples of people that looked like me on a day-to-day, right? I grew up in the town of Huntington, in, North Shore of Suffolk County. I went to I grew up in Huntington, but I went to Harborfield School District. So there are a handful of districts in the town of Huntington. But Harborfield itself, like, I was one of 2 Black girls in my graduating class. Okay. Like, people confused me and her all the time. Like, it was
How many
like
people
that,
were in the
right?
class? How many people in the graduating?
I actually know this because I was school president. My graduating class was 298. So that was my graduating class. I think the school altogether, like my high school, was like short of 1,000 people. So my class itself was about 300. But I say it was a double-edged sword because I didn't get to see people, like, I didn't see examples of, like, I didn't see Black women that were crushing it. I didn't see a whole lot of that. I don't want to say it felt lonely. I don't want to use the word lonely, but I will say that I have some pretty distinct memories of just feeling isolated, right? Like, just people saying backwards things, and you're just like, wait a minute, like, what did you say? And no one is really there to defend you. No one is really there. Like, you're the only one. So now I've got to defend myself. Like, I have to learn how to speak up for myself. There's beauty in that. And what else?
How did you like gain your, I guess, confidence to be able, you said you were a school president and everything. Like, how did you gain that confidence to be able to express yourself?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think I'm gonna transparently say that it was like a trickle down effect, right? So I expressed that I have parents, right, who instilled really good principles in me. Like, they made sure that I prioritized school. I have parents that instilled confidence in me. So, like, I showed up in school that way, right? Because my mama told me that I could do whatever I want, right? Like, so I felt empowered to authentically be myself. I think that was a start. But then when the results match your effort, you know what I'm saying? Like, I showed up to school confidently and I did well, but now I'm getting good grades, right? Now I'm on honor society, right? Like, now I'm being recognized for certain things. That's reinforcing what I already set out. Like, I already knew I was a confident person, but now that I'm seeing results, now I have the evidence to support. I felt confident, but like, now I could say I am confident because look at all of these things that I've done, right? So I think it's like a trickle down effect. And I also I think I had some really supportive adults in my life growing up. Like, yes, my parents, but I also had teachers that encouraged me. Like, they saw that I did well academically in school. So I had a handful of teachers that challenged me, and I think like in a good way, so that I could just continue to excel the way that I did.
That is amazing, man. I'm glad it all worked out, man, or we wouldn't even be here right now. So, I'm curious too, like, a lot of kids, American kids, are really not as interested in science nowadays, and math. So what exactly was it that kind of captivated your interest in science?
I had really great teachers. So like growing up, so it's funny because I don't think any child goes into school and is like, this is what I'm going to do. I think naturally, children show their skill set through like what they're interested in and like through what their strengths are, right? So very early on, I noticed that my strength was in the math and sciences. And I know for a fact that it's because I had really great teachers. I had really great science teachers, like K through 12. I could probably like name a handful of them because they literally had that much of an impact in my life. Mr. Zenu in the 7th grade, he was doing all sorts of like things to show us biology. Like, Mr. Bennett, like my physics teacher, he was drawing in different colors on the board to showcase like different principles. Now, I know that I'm not trying to like speak to the education system, but I think that the way that teachers show up in the classroom is directly related to how
I could speak to that,
engage,
and you are absolutely right.
So,
you are absolutely right. Yeah, so you had pretty much passionate teachers that were passionate about what they were doing, and they spread it throughout. So that I think that is a great recipe for creating people like you and students like you. So kudos to your teachers for really having a passion and being able to explain difficult subjects well. That's impressive. Another important component I think that we need to take notes on is you got into all of the schools of your choice and you picked some pretty difficult schools. So walk us through your process in choosing your schools, how the interviews were going, were there any patterns, and then what that formula was like for you.
I'm kind of gonna start off by kind of like what we were talking about before, with like growing up in a predominantly white area, right? In my adulthood, I've reflected back on this many times because I meet people my age. Like in adulthood, I'm interacting with a bunch of people that grew up here on Long Island, and I notice the differences, right? And sometimes it really comes down to the zip code that's on your address, right? So what is my point? I, again, recognize that I grew up in a town, I grew up in a school district that had really great resources. Like, I know that I was talking to a girlfriend of mine one time, and, we were talking about what coursework we took, like our junior and senior year, of course, in preparation for college. And I'm over here sharing with her, like, oh, like I took AP US history and I took AP physics. And she's like, wait a minute, like you had AP physics at your school? So like I didn't realize it because Harborfields and Huntington is the experience that I got. I had never had insight to like what other school districts were doing. And so my point is the education system is not equal across the board. Like, let's start there. And I recognize the privilege or the advantage that I had in attending the school that I did. And so I say all of that to say, by the time I got to my senior year of high school, when it was time for college preparation, like our guidance and like our guidance counselors and our advisors, like they were serious. Like they were serious. And it's probably because they wanted to be able to speak to the school's success. You know what I'm saying? But still, I recognize that I had some really great guidance from my advisors. I applied to, safe schools, right? So like I had a handful of schools that, like my GPA and my SAT scores, I was like, all right, like chances are I'm going to get into this, like no problem. Then I had like my reach schools and like my dream big schools, right? So I applied to everything from state schools to private schools. I applied to, I interviewed at NYU, I interviewed at Columbia, I interviewed at Boston College. Like these are all schools that have really great reputations. Like they are reputable schools. They are known for the quality of education that they provide. And I got into every single one of them. My senior year of high school, I was actually really proud of myself because I didn't know that I was going to get into all of the schools. I kind of just like created these goals based on what my guidance counselors were telling me, right? But yeah, I got into all of them. My parents came with me to every interview that I had. So again, like I recognize that I had supportive parents that helped me through that process.
Now you mentioned NYU, you mentioned Columbia, but you ended up choosing Binghamton.
Mm-hmm.
What went in? Yeah,
I'm gonna be straight up. So I applied for some of my schools early action or early decision. I don't know if things are the same anymore, but like back in 2007, when I graduated from high school, that's kind of like you could apply to schools early action or early decision. And a few of this, I think I applied early to all of my schools. And by holiday time, my senior year, I already like heard back from all of my schools. So my parents sat me down at the living room table for a conversation. My dad, I'll never forget this. This is a core memory for me. My dad laid out like all of my acceptance and like my financial aid packages, right? And my dad he asked me one question. He was like, out of all of these right here, he was like, which number looks better to you? So I'm looking at him like, okay, I see what this is. It's about money. And, I'm just going to be honest and transparent. I was a little upset with my parents during that time, right? Because I set out all of these goals. Like I got into all of these schools. Like I had classmates that applied to some of these schools and they didn't get in, right? So like I felt like I accomplished something. So I was like, part of me was like, how dare you make this about money? Can you not see like my accomplishment here? So I was a little upset with my father for kind of steering me and making a decision based on like the financial aspect of it all. But listen, fast forward to today, I am so grateful. Like I am so grateful that my dad kind of like he stood on business. He put his foot down and was like, yes, you did great. And like, you're amazing for getting into all of these schools. But after 4 years of an education, like tuition adds up. And when I reflect back, I'm like, had I gone to NYU, had I gone to Columbia, I would have racked up debt that I now don't have. So I'm really great. As much as it felt like a sting, I didn't recognize the blessing in it.
Thank you, Mom and Dad.
So I went to Binghamton University and I got a quality education that I could never complain about. Like I had a great positive experience at Binghamton.
Also, too, why integrated neuroscience? I mean, that to me, like the average high school kid, like is not thinking integrated neuroscience. That sounds like Einstein work right there.
I'm such a nerd. I know.
What fascinated you about that to make that your major?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, at this point, I'm a high school student, right? I'm going into college. I knew that my major was going to be in the sciences. Like, in fact, like the school that I got admitted to was the Harper School of Sciences, right? So I knew that I was going to be in that space. So I didn't go into Binghamton knowing that I was going to be a neuroscience major. Like that wasn't on my mind. Like that wasn't even I honestly didn't go in with a decided major. By the time I got to Binghamton, I was on the pre-medical track. And, I started taking like chemistry and biology classes. And at a certain point, you have to declare a major. So my first semester at Binghamton, I was not declared yet. It took some time for me to like figure out what I wanted to actually major in. And the ambitious, driven Jennifer that I am, I was going through all of my options in terms of a major, right? I could have been a biology major. I could have been a chemistry major, right? Like I could have picked something that's more traditional that people are more familiar with. But on the list of majors, it said integrated neuroscience. It had like a few stars next to it. And it was like it's a 5-year curriculum, right? So I'm like, oh, like what's this integrated neuroscience thing? So I kind of started looking into it. And to be fair, it sounds fancy and like Einstein and all of that, but integrated neuroscience is just a very intricate way of saying that I took a pretty complex like workload, but it was a lot of biology and it was a lot of psychology. And let's put that together. Like that is neuroscience. Like that is how our brain works. So in full transparency, I picked my major because I knew it was challenging and I wanted to challenge myself. It was a 5-year curriculum, and the advisor that I had at that time was like, if you declare this major, just know that it's going to be a 5-year commitment. And here's the thing. I always say, never just listen to one person, like with anything in life, because that's what my advisor was telling me, right? Like, oh, you're going to be here for 5 years. So basically what that meant was I would be paying an extra year in tuition. But when I would talk about it with like my fellow classmates, when I would talk about it with some of the older students that were a few years ahead of me, they were like, nah, like if you double up on this and if you take a summer class, like you'll be done. You like, don't listen to that. Like you'll be done in 4 years. So I kind of just like, I was like, I bet like it's a challenge. I'm going to do this. And I did. So that is my honest answer. It was something that was challenging. It was a hard track. And I was like, that's what I'm going to do. Cause I knew it would be challenging.
I know you just tried to simplify integrated neuroscience and you didn't do it. I'm still like integrated neuroscience sounds brainiac work. I don't think I would have got through that.
It is. I'm a self-proclaimed. I am a nerd. I geek
there's
out.
Nothing wrong with that.
I do.
At all. So what led you to the field of clinical research after all that?
Yeah, good question. So when I graduated from Binghamton, hard times, right? I graduated from college in 2011. I don't mean to mention Barack Obama in like any negative way, because that's my president, like always. But when I graduated from high school, it was tough times. Like we were in the middle of a recession. There were no jobs at that time. So personally, I found myself, well, I shouldn't say personally, me and everyone else, we graduated, we had these bachelor's degrees and couldn't even do anything with it, right? Like when I graduated from Binghamton, I ended up taking a front desk position at a medical group, like in my hometown, because I, of course, like went back home to my parents after I graduated. And when I sat there, I was like, wait a minute, like I'm working this job that is cool and all, but I didn't even need my degree for this. And I think that a lot of people at that time fell into situations like that. It was a very positive experience for me to still work. Like I was doing administration, like I was working an admin job for doctors. So it was still science. It was still healthcare. I learned the clinical aspect of what healthcare looks like. You could learn things all day long, but like I got day-to-day experience, right? So it was cool and all, but like I knew that I had a degree. I could be getting paid more. Like it was a little frustrating. Like this doesn't even make sense. So after a year of working that job, I made the decision to go back to school. I was like, heck, everybody else is doing it. And I have to say, like, I think, you know, when we talk about, I don't want to go on a tangent, but I think most millennials like fell into that at that point, at that time. A lot of people went to college, got a bachelor's degree. And because there were no jobs, we're like, all right, like, I guess I'm just going to continue my education. And that's exactly what I did. So I moved to Philadelphia, and that was in 2012. I moved to Philadelphia, and I pursued a master's in health sciences at Drexel. What made my experience very different in Philly compared to Binghamton was that when I was in Binghamton, it was very academic, right? Like I was an integrated neuroscience major. I took all of my coursework, but I didn't get real life practice. First of all, Binghamton is upstate, so there's just not a lot going on in the city of Binghamton other than the school. The school brings a lot of business into the town of Binghamton, the city of Binghamton. But when I moved to Philly, Philly's got Drexel, Philly has Temple, Philly has Thomas Jefferson, Philly has the University of Pennsylvania. I'm missing a few, but my point is the city of Philadelphia, I will always say, is like the mecca for healthcare. Like if there's anyone who is looking to pursue a career in healthcare, my advice is go to one of the schools in Philadelphia, because you're surrounded by hospital systems and you will find a job and you will get that real life practice. So when I was in Philly, when I was doing my master's degree, one of the components to receiving my master's was to do a research project, right? So I had to ask a question, I had to collect data, write a paper, and do a presentation. So I connected with a doctor named Dr. Kim at the University of Pennsylvania, like coolest man I know. But he really took me under his wing and taught me everything that I know about ophthalmology. He taught me everything that I know about the eyeball. He taught me everything that I know about research and clinical trials. So that was like my first point of exposure to like what research looked like. When I was at Binghamton, when I thought about research, Binghamton, I almost automatically eliminated research as an option for me, because in Binghamton, because it was such an academic environment, research meant you were either in a lab pipetting or you were doing like research with mice. And like, I wasn't going to do any of those. So I kind of like wrote off research for such a long time. But when I was in Philly, because I was around all of these hospital systems, I was like, oh, like there's research in healthcare. Like there are diseases and conditions that humans get, and we don't have all of the answers yet. So once I connected with Dr. Kim and, you know, I started to learn about research, I kind of like never looked back. It was a really great experience. And I am where I am now because of the fact that I pursued my master's in Philly. And I had a doctor like Dr. Kim to teach me. Got it. Is that a lucrative career field? I'm just curious about that. Yeah. Research? Oh yeah, there's a lot of money in research. And I mean, simply put, it's because it's within the pharmaceutical. Yeah, we're gonna get to that. Before. So pharmaceuticals, they run $1 million, $1 billion businesses. So yeah, there's a lot of money in research.
All right. So before we get into the pharmaceutical, just with research, drug research, curious to know, like, how do the drugs go through like clinical trials to becoming something that is on the market? Like, what has to happen in layman's terms?
Yeah. So I will always try to simplify because clinical trials, like it's very complex, right? So when people ask me what I do, this is the best way that I could describe it. And so I'm just going to make something up for a second, right? So let's say Joe in California is working in a lab and he's developed some compound, right? He's like, I've got this pill and I think this pill is going to treat breast cancer. So Joe is a chemist. He's a scientist. He has a drug that he thinks is going to treat some condition. But in order to actually manufacture that product and sell it, he has to go through a clinical research. Like, how do you know, Joe? You just made this in the lab. Like, how do you know that it's going to work in breast cancer? So the problem that Joe has is that he's got the drug, but he doesn't have the infrastructure to actually run a clinical trial, and he doesn't have the patients to actually administer the drug and actually start collecting data. So Joe, the scientist, or let's now call Joe, he is the pharmaceutical company. Joe, pharmaceutical company, will hire someone like me to basically oversee the entire process of what running a study would look like. So he would hire me to come in, and I am going to talk to him about what compound he has, like what he is trying to do. And basically I will help him or her develop a protocol. So like, what will the study look like? What questions are we asking? How are we going to answer that question? So I'm a part of like the design aspect of it. I'm a part of connecting him with doctors around the country, right? So that's honestly that is one of the biggest aspects of a clinical trial, making sure that as many demographics are represented in a clinical trial, right? Because you want to make sure that if you're saying that this drug is going to work in breast cancer patients, that it should work in all shapes, sizes, and colors, right? So it is my job to diversify the doctors that we go to get patients enrolled on the clinical trial. I'm a part of collecting data. I'm a part of cleaning up the data. I'm a part of looking at adverse events and like the safety profile of it. And like basically after all of that, we package it up and we send it to the FDA for approval. So there are a few phases of clinical trials that you have to go through before you could actually submit it to the FDA. So there's phase 1, there's phase 2. There are 4 phases of clinical trials, but you have to go through phase 1, 2, and 3 before you could submit an application, or it's called an NDA, a new drug application. You need to showcase all 3 phases of a clinical trial before, and each phase has a different purpose. Do you want me to like deep dive what that is too? I'll just say that there are different phases of clinical trials because you want to understand the safety behind a drug. You want to understand like what dose am I gonna, like if I've got this pill, do I give it at 10 milligrams? Do I give it at 20 milligrams? Do I give it at 100 milligrams, right? So like you have different phases of the studies to better understand like what is your final package going to look like before you actually submit it.
Now I watch a lot of, movies and cartoons and comics, and generally the scientists and the people that are doing the clinical research, it's almost like they have no moral code or code of ethics. It's like whatever money that is thrown at them by whoever they're like, I need you to come up with da da blah blah blah. Here's $5 million. Do it by tomorrow. And the evil villain walks away and it's done or whatever it is. That
Why am I thinking about Dexter's Laboratory? Oh,
yeah,
gosh.
that's what comes to
Right?
mind. And a lot of there's a portrayal of researchers, clinicians, and scientists in regards to them really not having a moral code or compass. And it's like wherever the money comes from is what I'm going to do. And whatever person wants to manipulate this data so it can come out is what I'm going to, figure out. So if I am, let's say, like, one of these people, and I'm like, yo, Jennifer, I need you to research this drug for me. I'm going to pay you whatever you want. Is there a way that you would figure out what my intentions are? Do you have your own moral or ethical code? How does that work? Because the movies and comics I've seen, like, it's just.
Oh, that's, this is such an interesting question. And like, I can't deny the fact that like nobody can deny that over the course of history, like we've had some pretty unethical things happen within healthcare, like whether it's a clinical trial or not. Like there have been unethical practices in healthcare that you just can't dismiss, right? So like, yes, that is true. But fast forward to today, I think we actually like the drug development process now is actually a pretty regulated process. So even if I'm still going to use Joe from California. Even if Joe from California wanted to do some shady thing and like slip me some cash underneath the table, like personally, I'm not doing it because like we have the FDA that oversees and regulates the market of drug and like the approval of drug. And we have some guidance in place. Like there's something called the ICH. We have GCP principles. All of these guidances and principles were put in place because of like the Tuskegee.
You reading my mind. I was just about to ask you about
like
that.
All of these, right? So like, the Tuskegee experiment is just one example that most people know about where, these men were not made aware of what information was being collected on them. Like they were told that they were receiving free healthcare, but in reality, they weren't informed about their diagnosis of syphilis. So these men like didn't even know that they had syphilis. And so the doctors that were seeing them talking about, oh, you're getting free healthcare, what they were really doing over the course of that time was collecting data on untreated syphilis. So these men were, spreading syphilis to their wives, to their, children that are now being born from untreated syphilis. Like it was just a very nasty, traumatizing experience, I think, for Black people, because most of the Tuskegee, it was definitely like a race thing. And no one can deny that. But my point is, I think that fast forward to today, like we do have regulations in place where you will be called out for fraud. Like your license will be revoked. Like your experiment will be shut down. Like I'm not saying that I've been a part of studies that have been shut down for unethical practices, but I have been on studies that have been terminated because it just wasn't proving a benefit. So the FDA is like, if this is not actually benefiting the patients, like it's chopped, like shut it down. And that does happen.
Interesting. Now, I know you just mentioned Tuskegee studying Black men and this and that and the third. It seems like there's been some transition into the prison population in regards to research and, drug companies utilizing that avenue. Is there anything connected to that in terms of protecting inmates and things like that from becoming a part of these studies?
Yeah. So a little bit of what I was describing. So like I mentioned ICH, I mentioned, GCP stands for good clinical practice. Like there are these guidances in place to really make sure that the human subjects, so like the people that are enrolling in these types of studies, like their safety is a priority and you want to make sure that their rights are being protected, right? So like fundamentally, one of the biggest things that I'll say is informed consent. I'm going to use Tuskegee as an example. And in that example of Tuskegee, there was no informed consent. Informed consent just means that the person who's participating is aware of exactly what it is that they're signing up for, right? Like you get a full description of what the drug is, what it's made of, what information they're going to be collecting, like what personal information they're collecting from you, like all of that privacy data stuff. All of that is within an informed consent form. The Tuskegee Airmen, they were lied to. There was no informed consent process. So let's go back to your question about like the prison systems. I think it's unfortunate that any clinical trial would be run on a vulnerable population, because that's exactly like in the science world, that is a coined term, a vulnerable population. Children are vulnerable populations. Elderly people are vulnerable populations. People that have like mental issues are like, these people are vulnerable because they could easily be manipulated into something that they otherwise wouldn't sign up for, if that makes sense at all. So I'm describing the prison system as a vulnerable population because you almost never know like how it's being incentivized. So I do think it's unfortunate. You don't know like what they're being offered in order to participate in a clinical trial. So personally, I'm kind of like against that, and I am against that, and I just don't see the need for a clinical trial within a prison.
Got it. And there's been a history of these things. I don't know if you ever read Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington, but she talks about this happening pretty frequently amongst Black people. So before we move on, what advice would you give like Black people that are faced with a potential chance of doing a clinical trial? Maybe there's some good incentive. Like, how do we make sure that these things are safe, or that it's going to be something that's going to be worth whatever it is that these companies are offering?
Yeah. I get this question a lot. So this is a good one. And I'm honestly going to make this positive, because I think that when you hear about research and when you hear about clinical trials, there's so much darkness about it that kind of overshadows the benefit to what is happening in the research world. So the advice that I would give is first of all, I don't believe in, like, for any major medical decision, I don't believe that anyone should have to undergo receiving heavy information by themselves, right? So number one, I would always encourage, like, if anyone is told that if anyone has received a diagnosis and it feels heavy and like overwhelming, my first thing is, do you have a family member or do you have a trusted friend that, even if they don't come in the room with you, you know what I'm saying? Like, just having a person physically present with you is going to empower you in a way that, that's like a known thing. Like, it's going to, the support is undeniable. So have somebody with you. Secondly, I'm going to say, if a clinical trial ever comes up, you don't need to make a decision right there on the spot. You know what I'm saying? Like, if a doctor tells you, you have abnormal cells, and now all of a sudden the lab reports back and it's prostate cancer, now they're handing you all of this paperwork and they're saying, oh, like, we've got a clinical trial for you. Take that paperwork home, give yourself time to really digest it. But not only that, like, also seek maybe a second opinion, but also seek independent advice from someone who actually knows the clinical trial space. Because going back to the phases of clinical trials, a phase 1 clinical trial, a phase 2 clinical trial, and a phase 3 clinical trial is going to look very different. Okay. So if a family member of mine came to me and they were like, Jennifer, like, this is what's going on, and like, my doctor is telling me XYZ, that's kind of that's one of my first questions. I'm like, all right, like what phase of the study is it? Is it phase 1? Because phase 1 means that's first in human. That's scary. This is the first time that you're testing a drug in a human. So with that comes a lot of blood work. It's a very intense experience. So I personally, I'm gonna make sure that my family member is well informed of exactly what they are getting into. So I would just encourage that a person to just get independent perspectives on whether or not a study is worth it or not, because not every clinical trial is the same. And then the last thing that I'm going to say here is that I think that there's untapped resource in terms of healthcare when it comes to clinical trials that I wish more people knew about. So a clinical trial, like it sounds scary because it's not approved yet, right? Like it's not available on the market yet. Like it's being tested. Ooh, am I a guinea pig? Yeah, that sounds scary. But if a family member came to me and was like, Jennifer, this is a phase 3 study, I'm a little more comfortable with that, because a phase 3 study means that they already know what the side effects are. They already know the safety profile of a drug. In a phase 3 study, what they're trying to do in a phase 3 study is comparing the drug that you're testing to what's already available on the market, right? So what that means is if my family member enrolled on that clinical trial, they might get the test drug, or they might get a drug that's actually already being used, that's already on the market, right? The whole idea behind research is that we want to improve treatment. There's no point in doing research if it's not going to be better than what's already available. So with that being said, there are a lot of people that don't have health insurance. There are a lot of people that are self-pay. There are a lot of people, and heck, as if insurance even means anything these days. Like you might have insurance and it still doesn't cover the cost of the medication that you need, right? So my point in all of this is there is a financial advantage to participating in a clinical trial, because you now have access to treatment for free that's already approved. The only difference is if you're not on the clinical trial, you have to pay for it. But if you are on the clinical trial, it's funded by the study team. So I have seen many examples of patients who were self-pay and they signed up for a clinical trial. They were randomized on the study. They didn't get the test drug. They actually got the drug that's already on the market. So it's like, this is a win-win, right? So I think that there is an advantage to participating in a clinical trial that most people just don't know about. And I think that's important.
Thank you for that. So when in doubt, hit up Jen and she will let you know.
For real. I think I should start consulting. That's that.
Yeah.
Might be onto something.
You know these things well, and you can explain it clearly. So I would definitely hit you up. Like if somebody came to me, I'm like giving you a call, like, yo, Jen, what you think about this? And if you agree, I'm with it. Yeah, I know somebody.
You know somebody.
Yep.
I'm happy to
help. So you spoke about a little bit about the pharmaceutical industry as a whole, and it is not a surprise that the industry is very scrutinized for things like price gouging, where they take, I've seen drugs that were like $15 a pill to the next year it's like $300, like, and I'm like, the average person doesn't really understand like how a drug can drastically increase in price in that short amount of time. I mean, eggs don't increase in price in that short amount of time. Like these are life-saving drugs, that are used for saving lives and doing different things and maintaining people's health. So what exactly goes into the price of a drug? Like, is it just whatever they say it is? Like, how does that work?
You know, I love this question because you're right. Like the pharmaceutical industry is like big pharma is scrutinized a lot. And this is, again, my honesty because I don't know how else to be. Before I went this route, I'm going to take a step back because when you think about research, remember when I talked about Dr. Kim at the University of Pennsylvania? There are different types of research. You could have like institutional, like investigator initiated, that's what it's called, research, which means that a doctor independently is interested in answering a question. That's what my FTLD research was, right? That was independent. That had nothing to do with pharmaceuticals. It wasn't funded by pharmaceuticals. Like that was funded by the institution that I worked for, right? So not all research is like pharmaceutical backed is the first point that I want to make. So when I first started working in research, I was working in a very academic, like the integrity is high, okay? Like I'm at the University of Pennsylvania. Everybody that's at UPenn is very passionate about the work that they do. Like they care, and it's not about the money. It's about solving a problem. It's about answering a question and just making sure that patients are receiving the treatment that they need, right? So when I started to consider a career in pharmaceuticals and in biotech, I was like really hard on myself naturally because I was like, am I about to sell my soul? Like there's a book called, well, you mentioned medical apartheid, but there's another book that's really popular called White Coat, Black Hat. So like it just shows that it shows the depiction of like the doctor who's in a white coat, who's like the noble one. And then like the pharmaceutical rep has the black hat. So that's the mysterious, like bad guy. Right. So like I read that book and I was like, damn, like, am I really about to do this? But I think at one point once I started to like dive deep into it, I started to realize that people scrutinize the pharmaceutical industry because of sales and because of the lack of transparency. I comfortably moved forward with pursuing a career in pharmaceutical because I was like, wait a minute, like, I don't want to be a sales rep. Like, I honestly have no interest in sales. Like, that's not what my personal intention is in working for a pharmaceutical, right? I want to work in research and development. So I felt very comfortable knowing that I was going to be working on things that were true to who I am, right? I do all of the things for a pharmaceutical company before it hits the market, right? Once it hits the market and once it's time to start pricing things, I personally, I'm great. I'm doing like a bow out. Like I have nothing to do with setting a price and sales. Pharmaceutical companies, to your point, are scrutinized because you're absolutely right. And I'm going to use COVID as an example, right? Like the COVID vaccine. During the pandemic, we saw like this huge push for people to go and get vaccinated. And I wish more people knew this, but Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca are the three companies that kind of led the way in terms of manufacturing vaccines, right? Each of those companies, I think the cost to manufacture a vaccine was different for each of them, but less than $10, Moderna, Pfizer, and AstraZeneca. But then when you actually go to look at, it costs less than $10 to make one vaccine. But how much were they actually selling the vaccine for? Like the government and insurance companies were being charged $120, upward $150 for a COVID vaccine. So now we're sitting back and we're like, wait a minute. It costs $10 for you to make it. That's a crazy profit margin. To go from $10 to $130, let's say, that's a lot of profit. So I do understand why people scrutinize. But there's so much that goes into that people aren't talking about. So research and development, it costs a lot of money. You want to know why research and development costs a lot of money? Because when you do a research project, you're literally searching for the unknown. By the time you're done collecting the data for a study, now you've spent all of this money, and there's a good chance that you just spent all of this money and you didn't even answer the question that's what research is. That's the gamble that you kind of, you could research anything and at the end of it be like, okay, well, we got our answer and it's not what we thought it was going to be. And that happens a lot in the pharmaceutical industry. Joe from California could have this drug that he thinks is going to work in breast cancer. And now we've spent all of this money. And now 5 years later, it's like, well, Joe, your drug doesn't work in breast cancer. So now what? Right? So I think if people had that perspective, they would understand a little bit more about why things are priced in certain ways. Now, I am not defending. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just offering a consideration. I think that should be considered. I think that when you talk about marketing and advertising, that's a whole other bullet point, right? Marketing and advertising is a part of that amount of money that they're charging. So when I hear that pharmaceutical companies are being scrutinized for price gouging, I think the real problem is that there's a lack of transparency. I think that's what the problem is. I think that if pharmaceutical companies were more transparent about how much, and I think that we do have politicians who are trying to make sure that happens. That's something that's very currently being discussed for legislation. But pharmaceutical companies should be a little more more transparent about how much it costs to create a drug and why, or at least try to justify why they need to charge as much as they do. It's to me, it's a lack of transparency that people have a problem with. That's the mysterious black hat part. It's like, what are y'all doing back there? If pharmaceutical companies were more transparent, I think more people would be understanding of
Very
why it costs
interesting.
them.
All right, I'm going to get to Whiplash very soon, but I just have my mind is just running around right now since you're.
I have another thing to say too.
Have at it.
Let me say this part because I think this is another aspect of it. So when I say lack of transparency, I think we need to hold pharmaceutical companies accountable, but I also think that we need to hold medical professionals accountable. And again, I'm going to use COVID as an example because a lot of people don't know this, but doctors go through medical school and research is not even a part of the medical school curriculum. Doctors, they go to 4 years of college, they go through 4 years of medical school, then they do a residency, then they might do a fellowship. The doctors that end up having research experience, it's only because they decided to do it on their own. The doctors that have research experience, they sought research to bolster their resume because, they were personally interested in it, but it's not required. It's not a part of the curriculum. Why does this matter? I think this matters because there are a lot of doctors that are practicing medicine that can't even tell you phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. They don't know it. And maybe that's intentional. Maybe it's not intentional. But I think we all got to witness that during the pandemic because the medical community was so divided during the pandemic, right? Do you take the vaccine? Do you not take the vaccine? Some doctors were absolutely, that's what the CDC is telling us. So yes, get vaccinated. But then there were other doctors that were no, I don't know. So I think that like the fact that we all experienced that during the pandemic, that just goes to show that even our own medical professionals don't even truly understand what research and clinical trials are all about. So I think that plays a part in the scrutiny. I think that plays a part in it too.
They don't even know about the drug that they're telling me to take, man. That is,
That's crazy.
Whoa, very interesting. All right.
It's not that they don't know about the drug. It's that they don't.
The research
at no point in their training is the process of research. At no point, like consistently, medical schools are not required to teach about research. I think some people have opinions and would say that it's intentional.
Yeah. We could leave that to everybody's opinion. Information is information, so people can do with it what they want. Last question before we move on to the whiplash. I feel bad for spending so much time on medical research, but it's so important. Now, you got sickle cell, tons of research, no cure. You have cancer, tons of research, no cure. HIV, tons of research, no cure. There are people that have an ideology that it is more beneficial to have a drug that fixes symptoms than it is to actually have a drug that cures. And a lot of people do not think that these things will ever have cures. And I just wanted to know, what do you think would have to happen for us to start being cured from ailments like these?
You know what? My thoughts are running wild right now. So I definitely understand why people think that and feel that way. Because let's be honest, I think we have heard of examples of celebrities or people with a lot of money having access to certain treatments that other normal, regular, average, the normal average American wouldn't have access to it. So that I understand why people feel that way. At the same time, the researcher in me knows that there are a lot of scientists out there that genuinely care about the work that they do. And a lot of them are not moved by money. I know that might be hard to believe, but you're a teacher, right? I'll use education as an example. There are a lot of people that are passionate about the work that they do, and whether they're getting paid to do it or not, their intentions are pure for why it is that they're doing it, right? So I say that to say, I don't know, I'm going to be a little bit of an optimist here in that if there truly was a medicinal cure, I think we would see development towards that. And I know that there are people that are working towards those things. Now, if there are outside entities that purposefully create obstacles in order for that to be met, that might be true too, right? Because people whose pockets are being lined are going to do everything in their power to make sure that the money keeps on rolling in. So my point here is it's not the scientists, it's the outside entities that are making dollars that we should be concerned about. I don't think that it's the scientists that have ill intentions. I truly believe that people that go into healthcare and sciences actually care about the work that they do. It's the government, it's the business-minded people that are thinking about the profit and all of that end up having an influence within healthcare, which is unfortunate.
That it is. Man, I feel like I could talk to you about this all day, every day. You do a really good job.
Because it's a really good topic.
I think you can break it down very easily. Some of these things get very complex, and people start talking in these high vocabularies, and we kind of lose it. But I was really able to understand what you were saying.
So every day I'm going hard. I'm talking business, bank accounts, and credit cards. And somehow we defeat the odds and making sure that no one starve illegal or you had a